Welcome to tonight's webinar, Exploring the Greatest Heights and Depths. My name is Sabina Cebedos, and as president of the Slovak-American Cultural Center, along with the team, I would like to welcome you to our first webinar to kick off 2021. Thank you for tuning in to what's sure to be a thrilling and fascinating tale of exploration by our special guest, Vanessa O'Brien. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to our Slovak-American community, Vanessa O'Brien. Vanessa is an extraordinary woman who passionately has pursued her dreams. Tonight, we will hear about her adventures and explorations and how she moved from a successful career in finance to mountaineering and what synergies she found. Vanessa was born in the US and also has British citizenship, and of course, Slovak origins. I tend to joke that somehow I always find a link to Slovakia with everyone I meet, and this is also the case with Vanessa. Vanessa has spent over 20 years in financial services in New York and London before moving to Hong Kong in 2009 to begin what turned out to be a fascinating new career as a mountaineer. Having lots of business experience, but no previous climbing experience, she set her sights on Everest, of course. She reached the peak in 2012. In summer of 2017, Vanessa became the first British American woman to successfully summit the world's deadliest mountain, K2. That's the second highest mountain in the world. Along the way, she set record after record. Among her many achievements and holding title of the fastest woman to complete 7 summits, including the highest peak on each continent, and being named Explorer of the Year 2018 by Scientific Exploration Society. As if that weren't impressive enough, Vanessa began mountaineering only a decade ago. June 2020, Vanessa successfully dived into the Mariana Trench. She has made history by diving to the ocean's deepest spot, the Challenger Deep, the lowest point of Mariana Trench. Vanessa's voyage meant that she spent 3 hours at the bottom of the southern end of the Mariana Trench, longer than any other woman. Now, Vanessa can call herself the first woman to the Earth's highest and lowest points, a feat ratified by the Guinness Book of World Records. Vanessa evolved from an adventurer out to challenge herself to an explorer with a high altitude perspective on a changing world and a new call to share her knowledge and passion across the globe. Vanessa is a Goodwill Ambassador for Pakistan, where she shares her positive experience traveling through the country, and an honorary ambassador for U.S. Nepal Climbing Association. She holds an MBA from Stern School of Business, New York University, and spends her time with her husband, Jonathan, who's a chief operating officer at an international law firm. As you will hear for yourself, Vanessa is passionate about mountaineering as a metaphor and how sport can play a role to help women gain confidence and achieve greatest heights. We are so excited that Vanessa can share her story with us tonight. In addition to her many accomplishments, Vanessa can add author to the list. In March, her memoir, To the Greatest Heights, Facing Danger, Finding Humility, and Climbing a Mountain of Truth, will be released. The book brilliantly weaves together Vanessa's exploration with her personal life story. At this juncture, I want to welcome Vanessa, and I also want to invite Matusz Chulan, SACC's vice president, to share his thoughts on the book. He has had a sneak peek, and I hear that the book is a real page turner.
Thank you very much, Sabinka. That was a pretty extensive introduction. Of course, when there are so many achievements, it's hard to leave anything out. What I want to talk about is her wonderful new book, which I think is kind of unique in the realm of explorers. It's called To the Greatest Heights, and of course, that's kind of obvious that she has reached some of the highest peaks. But what I'd like to focus on and what makes the book unique is really the subtitles. First of all, Facing Danger. Of course, it's on virtually every page, and I just challenge people to imagine themselves standing on the top of the Empire State Building, and there's no handrail. So what do you see is a bunch of ants down there, and imagine Vanessa standing on a rock and ice ledge at an equal height, and being just a moment away from being one of those specks down below, only being one of the ones that's not moving. So facing danger is a huge part of this mountaineering psyche. If it wasn't dangerous, these people wouldn't do it. Of course, you see that on many pages of this memoir. I'll remind you that she climbed K2, which has a ratio of 1 out of 4 people who attempt it don't come back. So that's very daunting. Second subtitle is Finding Humility. Each one of the chapters begins with some sort of a saying, and there's plenty of reflection in the book, not just climbing and taking beautiful pictures or facing adversity. Interesting sayings such as, let's say, never run faster than your guardian angel can fly. Don't rush. Don't, think before you step. An interesting thing, again, referring to humility, she has a lovely page referring to her thoughts as she was leaving a mountain without summiting it. And you're dejected, walking down, thinking in your head what you should have done, could have done, and that you have to know when to swallow your pride, as she knew from her business career. But the clincher is that the final phrase of the chapter is, she says, well, the mountain says, hey, come back when you have no pride to swallow, which basically takes it to another level, because the mountain will let you do what it'll let you do. Your pride is not going to take you to the top. It is more humility that will get you to succeed. A third subtitle, again, wonderful variant of just an adventure, is Climbing a Mountain of Truth, which ties in certain aspects of her life, and as well as the adversity that she faced. But, it's truth after all. It's, it's honesty and wisdom, and it's there peppered all over the book, while 90% of it is really, mountaineering adventure. Each chapter begins, like I said, with a wonderful quote. I'll hit you with this one. Success is the worst teacher in the world. I won't tell you who said it, but it's a very, very successful person, and there's a lot to that say. So it is the other very courageous thing in the book is Vanessa speaking about her very personal life. And these things are kind of strategically placed in there in certain flashbacks as the book progresses. And you're very, very surprised how honest and courageous this woman is in letting you know things that are very, very personal. I will give you a quick little taste of the book, if you don't mind. I'll read quickly from it because it surprises you here and there. Here is a little fraction, a little bit for our Slovak audience. It comes out of the blue on page 229, where she will go back to thinking about home. Background is she's going to Antarctica. She's in Argentina. They never heard of Thanksgiving, totally ordinary day. So she thinks about holidays and how things were at home with her family. Here's a quick little excerpt from the book, so you have a little idea about that. Okay. We celebrated Mass on Christmas Eve at St. Cyril and Methodius Slovak Catholic Church, just off Van Dyke Avenue in Detroit. The ornate sanctuary had begun to crumble a bit, and what remained was demolished in 2013. But back then, still imposing enough to put the fear of God in you. On the arch proscenium over the altar, inscribed in big Gothic shouty caps, was Kláňajme sa večne sviatosti oltárnej. Loosely translated, we kneel before the eternal holiness of the altar. As you know, St. Cyril and Methodius were the apostles who converted the Slovaks to Christianity in the 9th century. And as she says, the masses were still held in Slovak or Latin, which were equally Greek to me. grain of honesty there as well. Further on down, I saw another little tie-in with her background. Once again, these are very few. I mean, oh, well, there's quite a few of them, but it doesn't go on and on about them. They're just, you know, little snippets of recollections while she's there freezing on the mountain, or just being miserable, or resting up. This refers to when she and her brother, after a holiday dinner, would go upstairs to the attic. After we were excused from the table, Ben and I played for hours in the attic, a vast, dusty treasure trove of memories, mysteries, and fascinating objects, including my grandfather's pickaxe and headlamp, essential tools for a coal miner. Like his father, from whom he was named, he had labored inside the dark mountain. They'd each sacrificed at least one finger at work in the coal mine. Now when I'm climbing, I can't swing an ice axe without thinking of them. These hardy characters, built strong by suffering, by swinging an axe and leaving their blood on the rocks, humbly invincible, always moving forward. So, you know, the heart of a mountaineer has got to have a little bit of gas in his tank, and she certainly does. So I will conclude quickly, but just to say that the book isn't about, I climbed the mountain, it was hard, and here are the beautiful pictures. The book could really be 9 different books which describe her trips to the 7 continents and the various cultures she encountered. You know, these mountains are not at the foot of Grand Central Station. You have to really go into the boonies and interact with the culture that is there. And I mean, it was really revealing, from some very corner of Russia, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Antarctica. All of this is weaved together in a very, very seamless way. And I have to say, it's brilliantly written. 90% adventure, no preaching. That's my sort of a brief little read through the menu, referring to the book, and we'll proceed with I hope the banquet, which Vanessa will serve us up during her talk. Thank you very much.
So thank you. Hello, good evening, morning, in case you're calling from somewhere far away. I'd like to thank all of you for inviting me and being here tonight, especially Sabina, Peter, and Matt at the Slovak-American Cultural Center. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that lovely introduction, both of you. I would just say, Matt, maybe a request in advance, if you could just do all the introductions for me, perhaps between now and maybe the end of the year. That would just be lovely. I'm just delighted that you were able to read the book, and everything that you've said and all the sentiments are greatly appreciated. I'm just indebted to you for taking the time to do that. It is so much more than a mountaineering book. There are 2 versions of it. On the left-hand side is what you would see in US and Canada. On the right-hand side is what you would see in the rest of the world. They are exactly the same in terms of content. So one should not feel that they are seeing something else somewhere else. They do have different covers. So I guess, Matt, you really like the subtitle, and the subtitle in the rest of the world is How I Face Danger. So it still has danger in there. Found humility, so it does have humility, but it switches the mountain of truth for the expedition called life. At the very end, we'll talk about an offer for people who do want the book. We do have a special offer for people who are interested, so we'll come back to that at the end. One thing I think about in terms of exploration, which is our topic tonight, is really this particular audience, because exploration really, when I think of it, I think going back to my grandparents and my great-grandparents, because they were the original explorers. They took great risks at great costs to leave their home country where they were comfortable and where they had large families to face the great unknown, to look to opportunities of which they really had no guarantees, to try to build a better life. So that's what I think of when I first think of exploration in the context of our talk tonight and the cultural society, because it's heritage. And the word heritage is really a person's unique, inherited, hence the word heritage, sense of family identity, the values, traditions, culture, and artifacts that are handed down from generation to generation. And the first explorers, to me, really, no one deserves that title more than those previous generations. When I look at my previous generations and where they came from, I can trace them back to the Slovak Republic, but of course it wasn't called the Slovak Republic then, it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It became the Slovak Republic later on, around, after 1918. And I can break down from the country into the regions. And both regions where they came from, and this is the maternal side, incorporate really both Eastern regions. So you can see in the middle here on the upper right and lower right, the two Eastern regions of the Slovak Republic. And then if I go from region, I can look at the towns, but really both of these towns are on the border of both of these regions. And what's great about technology today is you can plug in a coordinate, much like you would when you're exploring for real. And on the lower right-hand side, you can see these two towns and where they are on a map. So although I've never been there, I know where they are and where they came from. And when we go to the small little villages in which they came from, well, some even today have a population of only 400 people. And Wikipedia even sources these towns as identifying that these were the towns that many coal miners left to move to Pennsylvania for the industry that would become the coal mining industry that Pennsylvania would form and would fuel the energy needs of the early United States. So it's all there. The research becomes very, very easy. It's all populated. But it's easy because of documents like these. If we start first with the picture, this is the picture of the first generation of explorers, in this case, my great-grandfather, who has the circle, the gold-colored circle, my grandmother and her husband, my grandfather, with the blue boxes behind him. And this is his family. So this is a picture taken, probably one of the few where they were all pulled together. And the document, which allows me to track a lot of this, is on the left-hand side. This is a declaration of intention. This document is important because it has to do with a law that was passed by Congress in 1906, given to the Department of Labor and Justice to administer. And because the form is dated in 1910, he's falling under this jurisdiction at this time. So what do we see from this form? First, that he's 45 years old. So at 45 years old, we have a miner born in both of these towns, he says, is Austria-Hungary because the Slovak Republic does not exist yet. So at 45 years old, he is exploring, he's going to another country to try to build a new life. So my first question really to the audience is, do you think that that is old? Is 45 years old? Because depending on where you live, what your influences are or were, you may answer that question differently. But I would like to tell you that he's 3 years younger than me when I was at the summit of Everest. And that's a bit of a wow. 3 years younger. So 45 years old, he's seeking work for his family. And he's fighting, and through this dangerous over the ocean crossing for his family. And underlined in the document, it says that he is missing digits. I call them digits, that's a mountaineering term, but we're talking about finger. Now look in the triangle, look at the long, long fingers on his right hand, opposite side than you're probably facing. And on his left hand, you see that those long fingers aren't there. So they're only saying one is amputated, the third one. And that is a casualty for life as a miner. Now, he comes into the US at 1910. That's why they're saying he's coming from Austria-Hungary. But the form in which he's being sworn in to take this allegiance, he has to say a couple of things. First, that he's not an anarchist. He's not a polygamist. And he has to announce allegiance and fidelity forever to the Czechoslovak Republic, because this form is dated 1924. So it's after 1918. So there's about a 14-year difference there. And there was time that had to pass in which he had to prove to be an honorable citizen. And I think they might have needed 2 witnesses at that time. So there are some clues. This would have been the mining town. In the upper left is the mine he worked at. In the small print, you probably can't see it's Penmar 3. And it's amazing what's online these days. I can see everything about Penmar number 3. I can see by year, by nationality, by Slovaks, how many were killed, what they're or injured, how many by the roles that they played. You know, they had to submit reports to, you know, the governor of the state, to the mining commissioners, to all of this stuff. The only reason I know this is because when I went to write the book, I went down the rabbit hole of research, and I couldn't let go of anything once I found a little bit of information as to, you know, what happened to some of these individuals that were in the mine, and some of the families. So these were the typical mining towns. They were company towns. So the owners of the mines pretty much kept the wages and, you know, supplied everything that they needed in terms of food. And it was quite a good racket for them. And the families, it was hard for them to get ahead, really, especially if they had larger families, which they tended to do. My grandparents had 6 kids. My mother was the youngest of the 6. And then if I look at early influences, it's kind of interesting to see a couple of things. First is in the upper right here is 23andMe. I don't know how many of you have taken RNA or DNA tests, but in this DNA composite, it says that I am 100% Eastern European. So there's not even 1% variance, which is fascinating, right? Not 99%, not 98%, 100% Eastern European. So first of all, that's kind of a wow. It's like no margin of error there. Oops, sorry, let's go back. And then all these early influences, how funny it is that there's so many mountains in the background, right? It just happened that all these family trips were we're going to see mountains, right? And I wasn't even aware of it at the time. But here's my mother and my brother and I in the upper left, mother, dad and I, amusement parks, I had pretty young parents, my father and I in the lower right. And then of course my grandparents, the same ones that you saw in those pictures here in the bottom, where I have the red and white dress. But, they were with us in very early influences around my opinion forming, my, views on morals, ethics, all of those things. They're with us in Halloween here on the right-hand side, and in the bottom on Easter. Grandparents, he was the coal miner there when he was young, and they were sort of our babysitters, so we were always left with them, and I very much adored them. So I see all this early mountaineering influence, so it doesn't really surprise me that later on, here I am looking at the world's highest mountains, and this becomes a later stage career choice for me. Let me try to describe what this chart is, because it's very simple once you know what it is, but it looks complicated initially. There's 2 rows of mountains here, and let me do it by color because that's the best way to read this. The red mountains in the back are the 14 8,000 meter peaks. There's only 14 peaks in the world over 8,000 meters, and these are them. The highest is Everest and K2, and then you go all the way to Shishapangma in the far right. They are in 3 countries, that's Nepal, Pakistan, and only one is in Tibet, and that's Shishapangma. So if you want anything over 8,000 meters, there's only 14, and they're in 3 countries. The peaks in the front row are the first and second tallest mountain on every continent. And the reason there's first and second is just to make sense across the 14 in the back. So you have 14 against 14. So we also pull the red in the front because red represents Asia. So Everest and K2 join the front row. We have a pair of green for South America, and that's Aconcagua. Then we have blue for North America, that's McKinley, and so on. So the ones I circled are the ones I've climbed. So I've climbed the highest peak on every continent, which is the 7 summits. And on the back row, the 8,000s, I've climbed 5 of those. So that's the lay of the land. People ideally like to, and there's plenty who have climbed all 14 8,000ers as well. Those take a lot more effort. So I'll focus today on K2 because K2 is the one I did last in 2017 and the one that is incredibly much more harder than Everest. This is a picture of K2 and it is in Pakistan. In front of it are the world's tallest buildings. The little red spikes are the world's tallest buildings, 2 sides against the mountain. And that is probably the wow on this page, because most people would say, that's incredible. That looks like people, and certainly if you were a person walking up to that, you would be the ant, right? If that's the tallest building, a person wouldn't even show up on the map. But that is the enormous size of the mountain, and it's simply what man can do, say build the buildings versus what Mother Nature can create. It's night and day, right, in terms of the size and complexity. And one of the very, very first things, and one thing a lot of people don't know, is there was mountaineering and Olympic medals given for early mountaineering in the early 1920s. And the founder of the modern Olympics said this phrase, and it always stuck with me. It was Baron Pierre de Coubertin, and he said, "We salute the most beautiful kind of heroism, that which confronts scientifically calculated danger step by step, without hesitation or sensationalism. And I've always loved that phrase because it captured so well high altitude mountaineering. And he awarded under his stewardship 3 Olympic gold medals, and only one of those years shown below was an actual summit, because that's the kind of heroism mountaineering, high altitude mountaineering encompassed. I looked to go to K2 the first year in 2015. And for me, it was an interesting time because just recently Pakistan had sort of a bad reputation on the international stage. There had been some unknown killings on a nearby mountain called Nangma Parbat, some executions of some mountaineers of mixed nationalities. So people, when I did my research, were quite hesitant about advising me to go. They really were giving me advice on trying to change my mind and saying things about, advice around the lines of, maybe I should make sure I'm not in the wrong place at the wrong time, or, make sure I change the way I look, disguise the way I look, something like that. But in 2015, I felt that, that there were people going. I wanted to try K2, and never in my life have I feared, traveling. I had traveled, Eurail around Europe and all these other places. I really honestly couldn't see how Pakistan could be any worse than the inner cities of places like Detroit or Washington, D.C. or Chicago, et cetera, et cetera. So I went, and I was completely surprised at what a wonderful experience it was. And like any adventure, some things are funny and, work and turn out differently than others. We, of course, had our flights canceled and ended up in this bus, which was rather unpleasant. And so the first year we go, intentions are with the large team to summit K2. Everybody's trained, everybody's prepared. And then we get to Camp 2. And unlike previous years or previous older expeditions, it's an El Nino year, and you can't just worry about warming of the oceans or water, heading east. It's a complicated world and everything's connected. So what we find is that it's a much warmer year in general on the mountain, and the mountain, it has like a slushy consistency on the snow, and the rocks that were previously frozen become unfrozen and start coming down like, just unleashing. Not like where we were there, but where we're on the mountain where it's frozen. And so one of the Sherpa here ends up getting a rock fall while we're climbing on the mountain, and that injury is actually in the middle of the bicep. If you can imagine, right in the middle of the arm, and that piece of metal stays there. That's not a temporary thing just to heal. It's a permanent piece of metal. One thing I was doing was taking glacier samples to see where, if there was any contamination in the glaciers, and we did find the same lead content that was also affiliated with Fukushima. So it does also show that what was up in the air that would have went through the westerlies landed both in Tibet and also in the Karakoram. And then on the way out, I spent time with empowering women through sports that was mentioned early on. Sabina mentioned that. Very, very important when you're working with foreign nations, but it was great. It actually wasn't just women. In Islamabad, we took both boys and girls. and it was great, of all ages up on this climbing wall. And they both stopped at exactly the same place when the challenge got too hard, and they just had a different approach. You know, the boys sort of fueled like this power to get there, and the girls were very plodding and, you know, sort of strategic to get there a little bit slower, but they both stopped at the same technical problem, which was lovely to see. But anyway, the accident really stopped it. We did get to Camp 2 out of 4 before the summit. So, you know, it was disappointing. The other things that I had done the first time. So this was, you know, not great, but I came out of the experience of Pakistan really amazed at what a bad reputation the country was given by the rest of the world, and what a completely lovely place it was. And that experience left an impression on me and made me want to come back, not just for the mountain, but to learn more about the country. So I did come back a second time. I called it season 2, like a good box set should be called. And we came. This time I put my own expedition together. I realized the mountain was more dangerous. As Matt said, for every 4 that climb, 1 dies, and that's for every 4 that summit. So I knew I needed to be fast, efficient, that it's built like a triangle, unlike some other mountains, which are, you know, more resting places and other, you know, places that you can get more reprieve. This is not a mountain like that. It's sort of keeps you aware and awake and worried about it from the minute you start. So, you know, we needed a very experienced, good team, and we needed to go fast. So we were doing really, really well this season. And then I received this message. These guys are at Camp 3 and we are at Camp 2, and we are on our summit bid. And I hear these words.
Sorry, Di, I'll repeat my last message. Basically, Camp 3 completely destroyed. All tents, oxygen, material, clothes, etc. lost. Over. Affirmative, everything lost. There is no such thing as Camp 3 anymore, over.
Okay, no such thing as Camp 3 anymore, over. It was like, I almost couldn't believe it. It was like a state of shock. Obviously, the guys came down. We tried to troubleshoot a little bit at Camp 2. Ultimately, all of Camp 2 had to come down, and it was like a mass exodus of people wanting to get out of there. You know, the word avalanche is just, you know, almost code for, you know, leave immediately. But it's a mixed use word in a way, because myself and the other female leader of a team were suspicious because we were only 1,000 meters below and we didn't hear anything or see anything. So we stuck around and did some research, and we couldn't really validate this avalanche, except the fact that there was nothing there. So obviously something took all the things away. But what we really wanted to know was how old that potential avalanche was. We knew when the guys went up that they were surprised. But it doesn't mean that avalanche happened right then and there. It could have happened, you know, days before. And if it had been an older avalanche, it would have still been safe to climb. So, you know, timing is everything. But what I learned that season was how really fear spreads emotionally and psychologically. So, and people look for excuses. They look for excuses to go home. They look for excuses to not to do any more hard work. They look for excuses to not be uncomfortable. And this is all okay. It's all normal. I'm not saying it's not cold and hard, and you don't have to have fun kind of a place to be. But fear spreads, and when you start to see the weather windows are getting smaller and smaller, and you do think of the words avalanches and stuff like that, really, you got to siphon out, and only the boldest and bravest can stay. And I realized that I had to be more strategic about the teams that I had. It wasn't just smaller or me leading or I had to really kind of siphon down some of these decisions and find people, in a different way, because it was too easy to spook people and give them excuses to go home. So in that third season, and I have to say, this is, when you don't do something the first time, people are very encouraging that you do it again. So it's like, oh, gee, a bit of bad luck, sod's law, that's unfortunate. You really ought to give it another go. And you got a lot of people behind you. When you come back a second time, that cheerleading group is, there's very few left, and they kind of wonder, gee, is it you, or is it, is it the mountain? And then they start to worry, like maybe you have summit fever, and, are you going to come back? And, so you don't have a lot of supporters on that third time. Anyway, that third year was tough for a couple of different reasons. One is there's not a lot of places to train in the US that I can get to high altitude. So for me, the best way to train for high altitude is high altitude. Surprise, it's cardiovascular. And there are no high mountains in the US. There is, you can't really get over, 14,000 feet. I'm not including Alaska, because it's the 48 contiguous, the ones part of that continent. So it's actually easier for me to go to Ecuador, where I can get to, 21,000, something like that, all the volcanoes out there. And a very, very small, silly, stupid, nothing, much of a volcano. It was raining, and I was running, and I slipped, and I sort of pulled my arm back in a tricep dip as I tried to break my fall, but I tore 3 of 4 tendons. So I knew something was wrong, and I remember getting an X-ray and an MRI, and I don't read Spanish or speak Spanish, but I saw a number, and that just wasn't it wasn't good to see a number. That's all I knew. Number wasn't good. And then I also thought, okay, well, cardiovascular, then let me run the Boston Marathon. But running is different than trail running or high altitude, which is not always about speed. And suddenly I had this kind of crack. You can barely see it over here amongst the white, which white is inflammation, by the way. But you can see just this little crack here on the sacrum. So they advised me not to run the marathon, but I, of course, did run the marathon, which didn't help my timing, but I did do it in Boston's one of the few you have to qualify and do in under 6 hours. So I still did it. But both of these things, in my opinion, were, everybody has something. And what I mean by that is, we're not all the same human beings. And, we all have different biochemistries. I may be shorter, somebody else may be taller, somebody else, from the beginning of time, I've had, metal in my feet. And, I don't talk about the stupid stuff, and try to say I am disadvantaged in any way. In my opinion, there are real people who are disadvantaged, and I'm not going to, say anything about me. So I just thought, okay, I'm going to go, and I'm going to, adapt around whatever is not working. So on season 3, as I called it in 2017, we were there, and it was a good year in that it was climbable, but it was a tough year in that it was super, super windy. And wind, if I were to pick my three poisons and say, okay, well, we've got temperature, which is low, wind, which is high, and precipitation, which is either there or not there. If we combine all those things and make them happen, my least favorite is wind. Wind is something that can just, it's like when you invite it to the party, everything becomes much more miserable. And the wind was just really, really kicking up. And I started to see on the summit bid, all the other teams turning around because there are wind traps. And I only knew this because we had managed to get high enough in that second year. So by going maybe somewhere just over Camp 3, I knew that Camp 2 in particular was a terrible wind trap, maybe some of the highest winds, and that if you could get over them or that particular place, that you had a chance. And poetically, it's what is above knows what's below, but what is below does not know what is above. And or I like to also call it Dante's Inferno. So you had to go through these kind of circles of hell and sort of graduate. And if you could graduate, then you were deemed, fortunate enough to come up one more ring. But if you got to the top, you would see in the lower left a bluebird day. But it did not look like that. Unfortunately, it was all gray and cloudy and windy and snowing, and you wouldn't see this unless you got to the top. So you really had to prove yourself. And we were the only team to summit. So I'll play a short little video here. It's hard to believe it's actually happened. Sometimes I have to pinch myself because, we went through some really, really tough conditions, with the high winds and the deep snow and the precipitation that was building. It's still hard to believe that the summit day happened and that we were able to persevere. Very gracious that the mountain allowed us to summit this year. Of course, it took 3 years, and there's no guarantee of a summit on K2. But I'm deeply honored that we were able to do so this year.
K2, successful team.
Over 3 years, there are signs of climate change and erosion. I remember last year thinking, wow, I'd never seen glaciers like this, and how high I was, and how magnificently tall they were. And this year I felt like, well, I was walking on something so much more deflated. That although there was all this snow and ice and everything here on the mountain, that somehow, yes, there were these rivers and they were running quite strong and they were melting. Now, could that refreeze? Of course it would, but they won't become the big glaciated buildup that they were before.
Waited till 9 o'clock when the winds were.
Thank you, Pakistan, for just completely supporting me through my 3 years here. I have loved traveling here. I'm so proud of our team of 12 that made it, but I have to commend the individuals and the larger expeditions for choosing not to summit, because there's nothing wrong with choosing safety first.
Congratulations.
Okay, perfect. So flag returns, of course, I didn't have a sponsor. It's hard to get a sponsor. They tend to focus on if something goes wrong and they see their brand tumbling down a mountain or something like that. But I did have national flags. I had the British flag and the American flag and the Pakistan flag, and finally UN Women. I was delighted to carry that flag. So flag returns were a special part of being able to take back to the appropriate parties. And And when I was finished with that, that was 2017, I started writing the book, which took about a year. People ask about that. The book is much harder because you have to get in your head and try to recount stories, and but not just stories of what happened on each mountain. We just talked about K2 and barely touched on 3 years of it. But every seventh summit, K2, or not K2, but Everest, and there's a lot of information there. But after writing the book, I started thinking about, I think it came up in a presentation, but every mountain had basically been summited before I was born. So all of these 8,000 meter peaks, all the seven summits, all of these things, they were all summited before I was born in 1964. In fact, in the early, when you think about Srebman Hillary, 1953, K2 went by the Italians in 1954. That was like the country's original World Cup. How could the countries show their superiority amongst each other? And they tried to get to the tops of these mountains. So even when I became the first American or British woman to summit K2, it's not really a record because I'm not the first woman. There's very few things you can do in this world first. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do them, because there's always things to find out and learn, because the world changes. Climate change is something new, that this generation is struggling with, say, that a generation or 2 generations ago didn't have to contend with. So anyway, writing the book, I was thinking through these kind of more broader questions, and I started thinking about oceans and who had been in the oceans, where had they gone, and really, when you think about Everest and K2, can you go lower than you could go higher? And the short answer to that was yes. As it happens, the deepest part in the ocean is 2 miles deeper than Everest is tall, which is just phenomenal and almost, shocking. So on the left-hand side, you can see Mount Everest over the Mariana Trench. And the deepest point of the Mariana Trench is called Challenger Deep, but 36,000 feet versus 29,000 feet. And that's a bit of a wow. So 11,000 meters versus, that's just incredible when you think about the 8,800 meters. So that became sort of an interesting challenge. And part of what made me think of that as well is I had met the first man to go down to Challenger Deep, and he went down with the US Navy. And I met him through one of the exploration clubs. So he was also very, very inspiring to me. Now, when I started thinking about oceans and I started thinking about what they had to do with climate change, first, 70% of the Earth's surface is water. So we see this when we look at a globe, or when we're talking about a globe, or when we're teaching. We look at a globe, but we don't really ever think about the entirety of that surface being water. But it's blue for a reason. It's water. When you start looking at climate change indicators, over half of them have to do with ocean-related principles. So people talk about the atmospheric side of climate change, but what NASA's actually saying are climate polluters, half of those indicators have to do with oceans. So that's a bit of a wow. Most people don't understand that oceans actually absorb CO2, so they have a practical purpose in helping us solve the problem. And then I came across a statistic that said we knew more about the surface of the moon and Mars than we did about our own ocean floor, and that only 90% of that was mapped. Now, we spent over $1.2 trillion on our space programs, and that's 19 billion per year since inception. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And just to think that, okay, that's space, that's great, but we don't know really hardly anything about the oceans. It just didn't seem fair. Our diet of fish, seafood, all of that comes from oceans. And think about water being essential for life. Our bodies, depending on the organ, 60% are made up of water, and we can go 3 weeks without food, but only 3 days without water. Is there anything else that doesn't just scream out like, hello, oceans? So I started actually ending all of my presentations on K2 by saying I wanted to go to Challenger Deep in 2017. And most reporters were like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah. And they had no idea what I was talking about. But they also didn't ask me any more questions about it. The problem was that there was no vehicle that existed to go down. And this is kind of a funny story. This is the picture of the vehicle that went down in 1960, which is the first time any vehicle went to that bottom of that trench. It was a monster. It was huge. It was enormous for where it was going. And the gentleman I was referring to that I had met was named Don Walsh. He went in 1960 before I was born with a partner, Jacques Picard. And he was with the US Navy. It would take 52 years, almost a person's entire adult life, for the second man to go down. And that was filmmaker James Cameron of the Titanic. And his vehicle also goes down and up and kaput. One time, one way. 2012, the year I summit Everest, second man goes down. No vehicle exists. It exists in 2019 only when the third man builds a vehicle of Canadian design. And it happens that I know him, which is unusual, because the only time the American Alpine Club ever had given out 7 summit certificates is the year he and I were together to receive them. So how bizarre, there were like 8 of us. So this Challenger Deep, 7 miles deep, a vehicle now exists. This guy builds the vehicle. He goes down in 2019. I see he goes down. It's been on my list. I've been talking about it for 3 years. So I call him. Hey, Victor, this is awesome. You went down. I'm so proud of you. This is great. You know, I've been talking about it for 3 years. You want to go again? And he says, no, actually. He didn't want to go again. Can't blame a girl for trying. So I waited. And then I got this interesting call from a Canadian submarine, a retired submariner. And he said, I needed to call him again because things had changed and he was going to go down again. And he did, and I did, and I got on the team to do some research to map the bottom of the trench, which had never been mapped before. We were mapping with sonar, multi-beam echo sonars, to see whether it was flat or whether it was going to slope, and by what degree, and train on a robotic arm to pick up some rocks or any sort of material we could to get specimens. So we went. Now, of course, what happens in the beginning of 2020? Well, this is a picture of USS Theodore Roosevelt. It's a Navy ship, and it has a bunch of Navy sailors, and it gets COVID. And it's heading to Guam. And Guam becomes an area where it doesn't want anybody to visit. So I will say only that this almost got called off. We got it back on. My guardian angel, which was referenced earlier, gets a rare blood disease and he dies before I can take my trip. I wore his dolphins, which are what's sewn to my jumpsuit to honor him. And the dive takes place, and I become that first woman, not even, real first, to Earth's highest and lowest, which was really phenomenal. But it could never have happened without him. So I am very grateful to him for that. That's Victor and I inside the submersible, and me coming out of the porthole after the dive. It was 11 hours underwater, pressure of 8 tons, and we succeeded in, it's 4 hours to descend, 3 hours across, and 1 hour up. So it was an incredible experience. I'm very, very grateful to participate in it. And it did happen during COVID, which made any expedition that much more challenging. So the book does not cover this because this was so unexpected and out of the blue. Of course, afterwards, there are the celebrations. Here you go through the late night talk circuits, the magazine covers, you get invited up to the White House. And if you believe all that, well, I'm sorry, that's absolutely all fake news. None of that happens at all. But it's always fun to incite the public imagination. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to questions.
Your experiences are absolutely incredible, and I can't wait to read the book and learn more in detail about the kind of day-to-day challenges you faced. And you'll be one of those inspirational posters that I have in my office, and every time I look at it with the quote, I'm going to think of you, and it's someone who's real, and you're a testament to that anything is possible. So thank you for sharing. I invite our audience now, if you haven't had the chance yet, please post your questions. Vanessa will do a Q&A, and very quickly, I'll ask Peter, we did ask some poll questions of the audience in the very beginning, and Vanessa would like to know a little bit more about you, our viewers. So we'll go ahead and launch that. What city, town are you joining us from? So it looks like a big chunk are from Washington, D.C. on this word cloud. We'll move on to the next question. We asked you 3 words you would use or that come to mind that describe an explorer. Adventurous, courageous. We have cosmopolitan, like curious, driven, brave, physically fit, a dreamer. Fantastic. And I think that many of those characteristics and attributes can describe Vanessa very well. Then we asked another question in terms of what is the tallest mountain you have hiked or climbed? And so we have some audience that are explorers themselves. Lomnicki Szczyt, wow. I don't know if you took one of those little cabins up or if you actually climbed it, but pretty amazing. So thank you for sharing your adventures. And then the next, Vanessa gave us the answer. So if you were paying attention, now you know, but what year was the first ascent to the bottom of Challenger Deep? And that was 1960. So pretty fascinating. It took 5 hours. As given the chance, would you climb Mount Everest or descend to the bottom of Challenger Deep? So it's interesting. It's like 50-50. Everest is edging up a little bit. So, and then we have one last suggestion for you. What place should Vanessa explore next? So you have some suggestions from us. So, of course, we welcome you to Slovakia. We'd love for you to come to Slovakia and hike some of our and climb some of our mountains. Maybe the Mars, Moon. Maybe those are your next adventures. Now, let me hand it over to Matusz, who will moderate the question and answer session. Matusz, go ahead.
Hi, how are you, everyone? We do have a series of questions, some of which I think were answered, but let me begin with a couple for Vanessa. In her book, there are obviously a little bit of interaction with her husband, who's a lovely man. I had the pleasure of meeting him. So there's one conversation with Spousey, as you refer to him, where he says to you on this Mount Everest stuff like, why do you want to do it? And you give him the straight mountaineer answer, well, because it is there. And his pithy response is, well, so is Mallory. Could you give us the context of that answer?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is when I'm first trying to convince him that, Everest is a great idea. And he's a bit, a British, a little cynical. And, I'm like, yeah, but it's a great idea. And I'm trying to go into, some of the history and, all the great mountaineers that have been there. And I think I bring up Mallory's name and he says, yeah, Mallory, because it's there. And yeah, he's still there. And it's kind of like, died there. Like, let's just put these things together. Like some people don't come back and maybe you won't come back. And, and I'm not sure I like that idea. And so that's the kind of connotation of that is he, because it's there and so is he. And, if you don't come back, I'll kill you. If you don't come back, I'll kill you, that kind of thing. Right. It's not great. It's not great I think it's always hard on the mountaineering spouses because they have to kind of put their head around the idea that it's risky, but they have to also have faith in you, that you won't put yourself in any uncalculated danger, that that you would turn around if you thought something was stupid, even if you were close to the top. You can promise these things, and they're situational things. Who knows if you would get caught in a search and rescue or something like that. I mean, you just have to have open communications and trust.
Well, you're very fortunate to have Spousey behind you because, like the saying goes, behind every great woman, there's a great man.
Perfect phrase.
Real quick question, also somewhat on the same macabre subject. What is a BDEF?
So that's a body disposal form. This is a form that one climbing company would ask everyone to sign. And what you were doing was basically saying, I would like you to do the following. And that was at great expense, bring down my body no matter what. At no expense, kick it in a crevasse. And in between, if you could please, move it aside and have a nice little puja ceremony, in Nepalese and say a prayer. So somewhere in between, you had an election, and those elections had different price points. So it was a very a rude awakening for a family member who's not used to these things. We as mountaineers see the bodies, and we have our sort of ceremonies and light candles for some things and other things, but for somebody at home, they're not used to being presented with a form like this. So it is kind of a cruel thing for somebody to see and have to think about in advance. But But anyway, he didn't really have trouble with that form. He kind of said, okay, well, where's the kick it down a crevasse thing with no expense? He was, so he was quite, he quite went for the low cost option, I have to say. So I hope he was prepared to do the other good things in church. That's all I have to say.
Great. This ties into one of the questions here. By the way, a little ancillary quip to the answer about, rather the first question was, he said, yeah, so is Mallory. And later he said, well, and a bunch of people who are walking around maimed or in debtor's prison. We have a question from the audience. Could you give us a clue on how, what the cost is of one of these expeditions? Let's say when you went to one of the other 8,000 meter peaks, which was a giant undertaking in itself. And was it different for K2 and Everest or whatever? Is it, you have to pay by the altitude, or is it somewhat the same?
Oh, it'd be great to fundraise by the altitude, right? And like reach somewhere and do something. So there are different price points depending on what you do. So I always like to look at it is there's a fixed cost, and then marginal cost starts to kick in. So that's why at a minimum you need a certain amount of people to make it work, or it becomes price prohibitive for one person to do. That's just the economics. There are definitely economics involved in climbing. If anybody tells you there's not, that's just not true, because it costs money. It costs money to put up tents. It costs money to get the supplies out there. You're going, 100 kilometers from any town. You're going to be on foot for, 300 kilometers from any town, on foot another 100 kilometers. If you're with 12 people, you're going to be moving, 8 tons of supplies. You need porters to move those supplies. It all costs money. So even if you're doing this yourself, you need some amount of money, and you need materials, ropes, et cetera, to fix, the more dangerous parts, or parts with crevasses, or, risky parts, even if you're climbing quasi-alpine style. So I would say if it's an 8,000 meter peak, and then that's taking 6 to 8 weeks at a minimum for acclimatization, that would probably be somewhere around $40,000, and it could go as high as $80,000. So, and that's not necessarily your cost, because now you want to get the 10 to 12 people. So you need people. You do need to, and that's why really it's important to set up with a good team in the beginning, and try to ensure success. You know that there's going to be bad weather days and good weather days, but you have to weigh it out. If you get there and you're there with people who how can I say this? Who decide that they don't want to be there, or easily will incorporate fear. You have to share the same objectives. They're uncomfortable places to be. And that's all I can say, is you've got to have somebody who can be uncomfortable for a long period of time.
Well, you convinced me to take all of the things that you've done, to take them off my bucket list, because I was able to experience it through your writings. And yes, the boredom, the injuries, the health conditions, folks climbing all these things, every climber has different symptoms from the altitude. And when I get miserable, I stop having fun. I go skiing, and when it's not fun, I'm done. So I'm not half the man that you are. Another couple questions, of course, I quite expect this from our audience. Would you like to climb in the high Tatra mountains? Of course, the highest peak in Slovakia is called Gerlachowski Štít. And second highest, I believe, is Lomnický štít. They're pretty impressive, cool looking mountains. on foot, regular people don't climb. There's not a trail. It is a climber's thing. So perhaps I don't know if that's on your scope to have a quick look at our high Tatras.
Yeah, I would. I've never been to Slovakia, so I would like to do that. You know, I'd like to see the country. I'd like to experience, you know, the climbing and you know, see all parts of the country. It's really unfortunate not to have been there at all at this point. I think the closest I've probably been is maybe Prague.
Okay, that's cool. By the way, the book is written in a very contemporary prose, and what the mountain climbers say when they have a problem, it's not you know, not for grammar school kids. The language that's in the book, and to hear that you know, I don't know, 6,000 meters is a little freaky, I would say. But again, to Vanessa's credit, it's something she ate and didn't go to the teacher and say, hey, this guy said this, blah, blah, blah. And knowing that this would just create further confusion and jeopardize the expedition, she just kind of stepped up to the plate and was the big person that basically took it and didn't mention a thing about it. So great character, I think you showed on that juncture, and I guess a very, very good question. Let me look through some of this. How did you find the time to write your memoir, and how long did it take? I think you partially answered it, but can you quickly tell us?
Yeah, sure. It took a year, really. I'd say a year, and I did it when I came off K2. So after 3 years of attempting K2, I felt I needed a break, and I guess I didn't realize how hard writing a memoir was. And the best advice I received was from a journalist who really told me, you know, just write every single day, you know, at least like 600 to 1,000 words. It doesn't even matter if they're good words, just write. And you can use all that material later, put it together, mash it all up, and then add and subtract, but get it down. And I did really go down some rabbit holes, you know, like if I came across something, like even back to the Slovak heritage stuff. And I remember, like, you know, finding that Penmar 3, and I was like, oh, you know, wait, you know, here's a clue. And then suddenly I was reading every report on that mine, you know, from the beginning of time. And, you know,
Right.
Then I found it as his employee number, you know what I mean? And then one company, you know, when he moved to Detroit to work for the automobile factories, I was in there, like, I must have traced this company from when it was just an auto part company to when it traded hands like at least 12 times to a subsidiary, which now is sitting in England somewhere. Like just a ridiculous, you know, time suck of something. But I was determined to, like, find, you know, every little link of something, even though it really had nothing to do and would never make the book. But, you know, it just showed that it was like, you know, just this part of me that was, you know, following these dots and pulling these threads and you know, determined not to give up.
Right. Well, I'd again say for our viewers that the book is very economical in some of these flashbacks. They're not an odyssey through the mountains, and the flashbacks are very, very economical. And I have to say, very surprising in so many ways, because you let people into your, you know, universe and past very, very slowly. And having seen the pictures, you know, there are flashbacks to times that were good and not so good. The memories that you share, again, very economical, but very, very revealing. How large are your teams? Now, this is something that I'd like to elaborate on. Let's say you're talking K2, okay? There were X number of people who were slated to try for the summit. And let's say off the top of my head, I don't know, let's say it was 10, but the entire organization and Sherpas and whatnot, in other words, how many people are involved in at the bottom of the mountain and the top? I mean, there are always Sherpas and all sorts of support teams going around. So tell us about, there's a 10 and how many more?
Yeah, so I when I think of teams, I always count everyone. So you're right in thinking this isn't necessarily a summit team. And also, all teams don't always make it to the summit, even when they start off going to the summit, if that makes sense too. The short answer is the teams always vary depending on what you're doing, and they're not always the same people. Because it depends who can go, the time of year. In the book, you see, I very rarely climb with the same people because rarely can we do something at the same time. I think one person I happen to do 3 or 4 things with, which is unusual. So you won't see a lot of repetitive names in the book, 1, 2, or 3 type of thing, unless they're the guiding companies. I think the smallest was probably the North Pole, which is, a sledding, and there were 3 of us. And the largest was probably something like Elbrus, where there might have been like 15 people. So everything else is in between something like that. But a higher mountain like K2, let me take Everest. Everest, we started off climbing with a team of 10 and 6 made it.
Right. And how many more people were involved in?
I see, at the base camps. So at the base camps, there's usually a cook, an assistant cook. It depends on the country, but in Pakistan, you'll have a liaison officer who's Pakistan Army. And then you'll have porters take you in and out and leave. And then if you decide to have a Nepalese Sherpa, then it depends how many on the mountain. The Sherpa can act in different ways. So if I don't have people to climb with, there are a few Sherpa I like to climb with who act more as climbing partners than men for hire. So I would rather climb with the Sherpas that I know that act as climbing partners, like the chap you saw with the thing in his arm.
Mm-hmm.
He's more of a climbing partner to me than he is a somebody that you would hire to to help with the logistics and put up ropes and equipment and stuff like that. So he's I don't believe in solo climbing or solo diving or I think people should climb as a team. I just think it's good practice. The mountains are not very safe, and people can go missing. I was just involved in a search and rescue for Winter K2. I would really rather people don't climb on their own. So it's good to have a partner.
Right, and ones you can depend on. Right.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know if you come across a fixed rope, somebody has to belay somebody. I mean, you just want somebody there. Some of these mountains, like after Everest, none of them are crowded. So you're, it could just be you and whoever you brought with you when it comes down to it.
Well, we have a host of questions. I think they're filtered a little bit, but I don't think we have time for like 20 some over here. I'm apologize to our audience that are asking questions. Here's a kind of a very broad one. How has your outlook on life and death evolved through facing the reality of death?
I would say it has evolved for sure. I would say I think climbing has made me more probably introspective, and I'm probably I'm probably a nicer person, and I probably care more than I did maybe before, when I was just in business and behind a desk. I guess because what we're doing out there has to do with life and death, and you have to be clear. Communications has to be clear. There's no time for mincing words. You can't sit there and say, well, I wonder if. No wondering. What you say, every word of choice matters. You have to be decisive. In business, there's all this time for fluff. Even in life, at home, there's time for fluff. On a mountain, there's no time. You have to be very clear, and you have to be decisive.
Well,
but at the same time, I've seen, all sorts of things, good and bad. And it's made me really reflect and, decide that it's if you choose life, and I hope people do, that it's important to be a good person, and to, I guess, the best thing I can really do is to try to leave a positive message, share whatever I have learned, and if I can be a role model in any way to anyone, then hey, that's great. Otherwise, then I should sit down and shut up.
Well, you certainly are. Here's a question that I can answer. Given the chance, would you do it all over again? I don't think we need to waste much time on it. Is that a resounding yes?
Yeah, it's yes, I would do it again.
Quick question here. Have you left something on the mountain or taken some good luck charm with you?
I have a host of stuff I wear around my neck.
But as far as leaving something there, I don't know, you can't really spray paint. Vanessa was here, but some charm that you left or something you take there that's not a custom in climbing, is it?
People do leave stuff. I don't know that I've left anything. I may have, but I definitely carry stuff around my neck for sure. There are all sorts of stuff, St. Christopher's Cross and my grandmother's wedding ring, an odd assortment of stuff that people have given me that are supposed to be good luck charms, but who knows?
Well, thank you very much, Vanessa. We apologize for those who didn't get their questions answered, because there's many of them, and we would just love to have been able to sit with you in a different setting than this. All I can say is, one more time, I'm not half the man that you are, and you talked me out of a whole bunch of things off my bucket list, and I'd like to send it over to Sabinka again, who started our program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matusz, and thank you, Vanessa. Truly inspirational, and indeed, you are a role model. And know that the Slovak-American community will be cheering you on in your future explorations and record-setting adventures. Your book is not only an adventure, but also a testament to your ancestors, and we wish you much success with the book. I'm sure it's going to be a New York Times bestseller. So I will make a decisive decision and definitely purchase one, and I hope our viewers will do the same. The book, there's a link on the Slido platform for a special offer that Vanessa was able to arrange for us, so we thank her. You will receive a signed copy with the purchase of your book, so that's quite amazing. And as Matusz indicated, unfortunately, we weren't able to get together in person so that she could sign your books with your names and whatnot. But this, I think, is a special treat. So if you are interested in reading more about her incredible adventures, indeed, pick up a copy using that link. And then I wanted to thank all of you for attending. And we do have a special surprise for one of our viewers, and they will receive a copy a signed copy of Vanessa's book, and that person is Ingrid Solkolski. And let me conclude on this note again. Thank you, Vanessa. It was absolutely fascinating evening. I could listen to you all night, and I really appreciate you finding the time to meet with us and our community and share with us your experiences. I'd like to thank my co-moderator, Matusz Tulen. Behind the scenes, I want to thank Peter Krajniak, Tanya Pulvar, Andrea Mlinarova, and the SACC team. A big special thank you to Slido, which is an excellent platform that we use tonight. And I encourage all of you to go to our website, Slovak-American.cc.org, to check out the 2021 series of webinars. If you aren't receiving our emails, sign up there and consider becoming a member. Vanessa did touch on the importance of oceans to our ecosystem. And on March 16th, I invite you at 6 p.m. To explore with us a huge environmental concern, plastics in our oceans. We'll be having a webinar, Creative Solutions for Saving Our Oceans, which will feature architect Lenka Peterkova. She's the creator of the 8th Continent, so look it up if you haven't heard about it yet, and a nonprofit Plastics Ocean project. So we hope you will join us on March 16th at 6 p.m. Thank you again, Vanessa, and thank you to all of you. Be well.